If you would, permit me to share with you first a snippet of a story, two stories for today, but the first one is a small piece, one that you've probably heard before. And if you've been a student in any of Dr. Eglo's classes, I'm sure you've heard this before. But even so, perhaps hear it again today with a different ear and picture it anew in your imagination. Francesco di Bernardone, our Holy Father, St. Francis, our beloved patron. Francis's world was filled with violence between the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire, between Assisi and other towns, and in the town itself, between the merchant class and local nobility. It would not have been a rare day when Francis saw somebody being attacked at knife point in the street. In 1202, around the age of 21, he himself proudly went to war in a battle between Assisi and Perugia. He was apparently glad to go. He got to wear fine clothes and ride an excellent horse. But Assisi was soon defeated, and Francis spent a year in a dank prison with rats before his father was able to ransom him. It was probably in prison that the change in Francis began. As his friends noticed, he had lost his heart for revelry, and it was replaced by something else. Outside the city walls, he found a little abandoned church, and he spent whole days there praying and fasting. Finally, he began sleeping there as well. Pietro di Bernardone, Francis's merchant father, his business may well have been secured by his wife's dowry. So when she died, therefore, a good chunk of the family's holdings would go to Francis, who, if he was going to be communing with God all day, would be a poor guardian of their enterprise. So when Francis was about 25, Pietro took him to the town's ecclesiastical court and explained how the young man had disregarded his responsibilities. Francis agreed with what his father said and renounced all of his claims on his family. Then we are told by early biographers, he stripped naked, placed his clothes at his father's feet, and said that from then on, not Pietro would be his father, but rather God. There's no evidence that Francis ever again conversed with his parents. What a brave move on the part of Francis. Status in society, his role as a burgeoning cloth merchant, was literally what secured his daily sustenance. Yet he was willing to follow his heart and make the bold decision to do what he knew was right, to begin the work of rebuilding the church as was communicated by God to him in his prayer. We see another example of this in today's gospel, also a story which you perhaps have heard multiple times. But again, if you'll permit me to reframe it and invite us to hear it anew, perhaps with a 2021 ear, the parable of the Good Samaritan. I don't think it takes too much for us to realize who did the right thing. It was the last guy, the guy who stopped and was kind and merciful. But it really is not a story that is just meant for Jesus to say who did the right thing. There was a lot more happening in this story. So for example, the three people that stopped were a priest, a Levite, and then a Samaritan. The Samaritan's the one who did the right thing. There was big animosity at that point between Samaria and the regular Jews from Judah and Jericho, that really it was so much considered an outsider, it would be unheard of for these two to even acknowledge each other's presence. So what would I use as an example perhaps today, if you would permit me to tell you just an example from my own life? My brother and I were latchkey kids, if you can, I don't know if you guys even know what that, some of you even know what that term is today, but we used to go to school in the morning and then we had to make our own way home and be able to let ourselves into our house for about 2 hours before our parents came home, which required us growing up in Brooklyn, taking the bus for us. So at one point when we would transfer from one bus to the other, we were waiting on the corner for the next bus to show up. And as we got off of our bus, a group of kids got off the front of the bus. This is a true story. Got off the front of the bus who didn't always get off at our stop. So I don't know if anybody's a real New Yorker here, you immediately get a little aware of what's going on at that moment. And this group of kids came over to me and my brother and began to talk about, oh, randomness, how are you? What's going on? Hey, that's a nice watch you have on there. So if you're a New Yorker, again, you realize where this story is about to go. And it was this cool Casio calculator watch that I remember that I had had. And needless to say, in a few moments, it was no longer mine. My brother and I got mugged that day. And it was a difficult thing I was in the 7th grade or something like that. And the kids ran away. And I would like to share that it was very difficult. My brother and I felt not only physically beaten up, but if I can be honest, as a guy, we're supposed to be strong and we're supposed to be able to stand up to things, and very much feeling not only physically hurt, but emotionally hurt as well. And now put yourself in the place of the gospel today. Who would have been the first person that walked by and maybe metaphorically saw my brother and I there on the ground? Would have been a priest. Good Shepherd Church was right down the block from where this happened. What would it have felt like, for example, if my brother and I were on the ground there and a priest walked by and said, sorry, I'm too busy praying. I can't be bothered to help you. I think it would hurt even more. The second person who walked by in the gospel was a Levite. Back then, a teacher of the law. I ask you to imagine, who's your favorite professor here? Somebody who you know, who you have a really good connection with, who you really feel understands and knows you well. Well, imagine how much more that would hurt if that person saw you and walked right by afterwards. Talk about adding insult to injury. And now who's the third person who was showing up? In the gospel, it was the Samaritan, somebody a bit on the outside, easy to recognize they're not even there perhaps. So imagine this as an example. In my neighborhood, there are those folks who go around and collect the cans with tremendous shopping carts and clear plastic bags of 5-cent cans. In fact, I think you know what I'm talking about with those. Imagine if that's the third person who stopped by, clearly having no reason to stop and help me after I had just had this experience happen on the bus stop. And imagine that that's the person who stopped what they were doing and said, here's somebody who needs help. I have no reason to do this, but let me be able to take this person on my own and bring them to somewhere where they can get some help. And then gospel continues to go on and say, it's not even just about somebody who's on the outside making a bold decision to do that, to step out of their role and help others, but rather brought the person to the inn, left them there to get help, and said, wait a minute, I can't stay here. I have to keep going out and collecting more cans right now. And when I come back this way, if you spend any more on him, I'm going to give you some of my can money to keep helping him here. That's the radical, bold decision that the gospel is accentuating for us today. Not just to say it's good to be a good guy following in St. Francis' example, but to make a bold decision like he did in the beginning of the story, and then in the example that the gospel shows us. In Francis' life and in the gospel passage of the Good Samaritan, both required bold decisions and bravery. And is that not also the case for our college today? What a great opportunity we have ahead of us. Likewise, on the precipice of having made the bold decision to transition from our beloved 180 Remsen to a new chapter ahead, to bring SFC forward. I would say it's something that's going to require on each of our parts the same degree of bravery that we heard evidenced here today. I think that especially today on his feast, our patron St. Francis would be proud of us. This bold decision calls all of us to be leaders, committed to furthering our Franciscan community forward. This year, the college's Office of Mission and Ministry has chosen to animate the meaning of Franciscan community in our programming, our work, and in our prayer. We invite each of you to join us, especially this week, in the numerous programs planned in boldly keeping our Catholic and Franciscan values at the center of who we are and all that we do.